Before we dive into today's powerful story, if you love first-person grandma revenge stories, tales of resilience, and inspiring comebacks, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new episode. Each story is filled with lessons about courage, dignity, and finding your voice, even when the world tries to silence you. They say blood is thicker than water, but my own granddaughter proved that some blood runs cold as mountain snow. After I signed those papers, believing they were just insurance updates, she looked me dead in the eye and told me I was nothing more than a tenant in the house I'd built with my late husband 40 years ago. The Georgia peach orchard that James and I planted with our bare hands, tree by tree, was no longer mine. I walked out that humid July evening with nothing but the sound of her cruel laughter echoing behind me. My chest burned with a pain deeper than grief, sharper than the day I buried James. I thought I'd weathered the worst storms life could throw at an 80-year-old woman, but this betrayal cut through me like a blade through ripe fruit. What Madison didn't know was that her grandfather and I had learned long ago never to put all our trust in one basket. We'd planted more than peach trees on that land, we'd planted contingencies. The dinner was supposed to be a celebration. Just family and close friends gathered under the string lights on the wraparound porch of our farmhouse, overlooking rows of peach trees heavy with late summer fruit. I'd spent the morning making my famous peach cobbler and setting out mason jars filled with sweet tea and fresh mint from the garden. They didn't know why I'd called them together. I wanted it to be a surprise. I'd been rehearsing the words all day, that I was stepping back from daily operations and transitioning the orchard into a family trust. At 79, I figured it was time to let the younger generation take the reins while I could still guide them. I thought it would be a moment of pride, watching my granddaughter Madison and her husband Tyler carry on what James and I had built from nothing. Instead, Madison stood up before I could speak, raising her glass of sweet tea like she was making a toast. Her voice carried that syrupy sweetness she'd perfected in her pageant days. "Y'all, we are just so blessed," she announced, her red lipstick perfect even in the humidity. "As of this morning, Grandmama has officially signed over the orchard and the lake house to Tyler and me. We're honored to carry on the Hartwell legacy." The polite applause that followed felt like slaps against my ears. I saw confusion in some faces, uncertainty in others. Someone gave a nervous laugh. Every eye turned to me, but I hadn't said those words. I hadn't agreed to that. Madison smiled at me like we'd planned this together, like I was just a forgetful old woman who'd lost track of her own decisions. My lips parted, but the porch seemed to tilt beneath my feet before I could form words. Tyler stepped beside her, placing a manila folder on the picnic table with practiced casualness. "The paperwork's all official," he said, his Mississippi drawl thick as molasses. "Grandmama just forgot to mention it to everyone first." I stared down at the documents. There was my signature, clear as day, on what I'd thought were routine insurance forms for hurricane season. Tyler had rewritten the terms. Madison had slipped the real documents in with the stack, and I'd signed them without reading closely, trusting my own granddaughter. My heart sank into my stomach, but I kept my face steady. Years of church committee meetings and PTA battles had taught me not to let every emotion show. Tyler leaned closer, his cologne mixing with the peach-scented air. "We figured this was the perfect time to share the news, since you love surprises so much. Besides, Madison's been working herself to death helping run this place. She deserves to feel like it's really hers now." Madison didn't even look at me. She turned back to our guests with that beauty queen smile and said, "Grandmama's done more than enough. She's earned her rest. We'll make sure the orchard keeps thriving." Then it happened. Madison placed her manicured hand on my arm and spoke just loud enough for the people nearest to hear. "You can keep the guest bedroom for now, but please don't go through Granddaddy's office. We'll be reorganizing everything in there." That was it. The guest bedroom. In the house James and I built board by board. Where I'd raised Madison's father after her grandmother passed. Where Madison herself had spent every summer of her childhood, climbing peach trees and helping me make preserves. I didn't speak. Couldn't speak. I stood up from my own picnic table, walked past the roses James planted for our anniversary, past the tire swing that had entertained 3 generations of children, and kept walking until I reached the back door. Nobody came after me. I packed a small suitcase with shaking hands and drove to our lake house in North Georgia, the one tucked away in the mountains where James and I used to escape during the hottest August days. The 3-hour drive through winding mountain roads gave me time to think, time to let the shock wear off and the anger settle into something harder. When I reached the gate, I punched in our old code. Access denied flashed on the digital display. I tried again. Still denied. They'd changed the locks on that house too. For a few minutes, I sat in my truck with the engine running, watching fireflies begin to dance around the oak trees. Then I got out and walked around to the back deck. Motion sensors flooded the yard with harsh white light. A security camera, one Tyler had installed for safety, pivoted to follow me. I sat on the back steps with my suitcase beside me, listening to the lake water lap against the dock where James used to fish every morning. The sound that once brought me peace now felt like mockery. That night, I didn't cry. Not because it didn't hurt, but because the hurt was too big to fit through tears. I drove back down the mountain to a budget motel near Helen, one of those places that smelled like industrial carpet cleaner and broken dreams. I lay awake in that narrow bed, staring at water stains on the ceiling, replaying Madison's voice, "You can keep the guest bedroom. Please don't touch Granddaddy's office." The next morning, I called Harold Wembley, the lawyer who'd handled our affairs since James passed. His secretary tried to schedule me for the following week, but I told her it was urgent. Harold had been James's college roommate before he became our attorney. He understood family loyalty and family betrayal. Harold's office still smelled like leather and old books, just like it had 20 years ago when James and I first walked in to discuss our wills. I sat in the same chair where I'd signed our last testaments, where we'd planned for every contingency except this one. "She did it," I said without preamble when Harold closed the door behind us. He didn't ask what I meant. Harold had known Madison since she was knee-high to a grasshopper, had watched her grow from a sweet child into a woman who'd learned to use her smile as a weapon. He reached for a locked filing cabinet and pulled out a thick folder. "The private trust agreement," he said quietly. "The one we set up after James's heart attack, when you were worried about predators circling the orchard." I'd forgotten about it, not forgotten, exactly, but filed it away in the part of my mind reserved for emergency measures I hoped never to use. James had insisted on it after watching too many family farms get swallowed up by developers or torn apart by greedy relatives. "I want to activate it," I said. Harold nodded. He'd seen this coming, I could read it in his face. "It'll take 48 hours to file with the county. After that, every document they signed is null and void. I want them out," I added. "Off the property, away from the orchard. I want this reversed, legally and publicly." Harold adjusted his glasses. "Martha, are you absolutely sure? Once we do this, there's no going back to family dinners and birthday parties." I thought about Madison's laugh, about Tyler's smug smile, about being called a guest in my own home. They made that choice for me. After leaving Harold's office, I drove to the Dollar General and bought a composition notebook and a pack of pens. Then I sat in my truck in the parking lot and began to write. Not a journal entry or a letter, a plan. Madison thought she'd won because she was young and pretty and knew how to manipulate people. But she'd forgotten something important. I'd been young once too, and I'd survived the Depression, Jim Crow, 3 miscarriages, and the slow death of the man I loved. I'd learned to fight battles she couldn't even imagine. That evening, I drove past the orchard. I parked by the old equipment shed where James used to keep his tools and walked through the back rows of trees, staying in the shadows. The peaches were almost ready for the final harvest, James always said you could tell by the way they glowed in the evening light, like Chinese lanterns. I saw Madison near the main barn, directing the seasonal workers with gestures that looked like she was conducting an orchestra. She wore one of my old sun hats like it had always belonged to her, pointing at rows of trees as if she'd pruned every branch herself. The sight of her made my hands shake, but not from fear. From fury. From the crystalline clarity that comes when you finally see someone's true face. I left before anyone spotted me. This wasn't going to be a quiet family confrontation in the barn. When I took back what was mine, everyone would see. That night, I made phone calls. I started with Betty Sue Caldwell from the church committee, then moved on to the ladies from the Historical Society, and finally reached out to Jim Crawford from the local newspaper. I didn't tell them everything, just enough to plant seeds of curiosity. By the time I hung up the phone, word was already spreading through Clarksville like kudzu in summer. Something big was coming to the Hartwell orchard, and Martha Hartwell had invited the whole town to witness it. The morning of the Peach Festival dawned clear and hot, the kind of August day in Georgia where the air shimmers like water over the asphalt and the cicadas start their singing before sunrise. I sat in my motel room, drinking instant coffee and watching the news, while Madison prepared for what she thought would be her crowning moment as the new queen of Hartwell Orchard. She had no idea what was coming. I dressed simply, navy blue dress, sensible shoes, my wedding pearls. Not because I was trying to look respectable, but because I wanted nothing to distract from what I had to say. When you're about to strip away someone's lies, your appearance should be as clean as your conscience. The festival grounds were already bustling by 9 a.m. Vendors set up their booths along Main Street, the air filling with the smell of funnel cakes and barbecue. The Clarksville Peach Festival was the biggest event of the summer, drawing visitors from 3 counties. Perfect timing for what I had planned. Madison's booth was positioned right in the center, adorned with baskets of our prize-winning peaches and professional photographs of the orchard that Tyler had commissioned. Madison herself looked like something out of Southern Living magazine, white sundress, perfectly curled hair, a smile bright enough to sell ice to Eskimos. She was in her element, posing for pictures with the mayor, accepting congratulations from people who thought she'd legitimately inherited the family business. Tyler worked the crowd like a politician, shaking hands and talking about expansion opportunities and modernizing agricultural practices. They were celebrating their theft in front of the whole town. I stayed in the background until almost noon, watching them bask in their stolen glory. Harold arrived at 11:30, carrying a leather briefcase and wearing the serious expression that meant business. He positioned himself near the main stage where the afternoon presentations would take place. At exactly 12 o'clock, Betty Sue Caldwell took the microphone to announce the special presentation. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said in her sweetest church lady voice, "we have a wonderful tribute to share with you today, honoring 40 years of the Hartwell family legacy." Madison tilted her head, confusion flickering across her features. She whispered something to Tyler, who shrugged and continued schmoozing with potential customers. The screen lit up behind the stage, a large white sheet Harold had arranged to be stretched between 2 poles. The presentation began with old photographs, James and me as newlyweds, standing beside our first peach saplings, the original farmhouse before we added the wraparound porch, Madison as a little girl, gap-toothed and pigtailed, helping me hang peaches on the drying racks. The crowd murmured appreciatively. Madison smiled and waved, thinking this was all about honoring her family's history, which, in a way, it was. Then the tone shifted. The screen filled with email printouts. Tyler's correspondence with AgriCorp Industries, the agricultural conglomerate based in Atlanta. The subject lines were damning: acquisition proposal, Hartwell property, development timeline, projected profit margins. People in the crowd started leaning forward, squinting at the screen. Someone said, "What's all that about?" The emails laid out Tyler's plan in cold, corporate language. Sell the orchard to AgriCorp for development into a luxury subdivision. Projected value, $4.8 million. Timeline: completed sale within 6 months of acquiring legal ownership. Madison's face went white beneath her foundation. Tyler stepped closer to her, his hand reaching for her elbow, but she jerked away. The screen changed again. This time, security footage from my own home, the cameras Tyler had installed for our protection. The footage showed Tyler and Madison in James's office, going through our filing cabinets, pulling out insurance documents, scanning papers. In the grainy black and white video, Tyler held up a document and said clearly, "If we can get her to sign this version instead, it's done." Madison's response was just as clear: she never reads the fine print anymore. Getting old, I guess. The festival grounds fell silent except for the distant sound of the tilt-a-whirl and a crying baby. Then the murmurs started, growing louder. I heard someone say, "Sweet Jesus, they robbed that old woman." Another voice, "And she raised that girl like her own daughter." Madison tried to say something, but her voice was drowned out by the crowd's reaction. Tyler's face had gone red as fresh strawberry jam. That's when I stepped forward. I didn't use the microphone. My voice had carried across tobacco fields and through Sunday school lessons for nearly 80 years, it could carry across a festival crowd. "Everything you just saw is real," I said, my voice cutting through the noise like a knife through butter. Every signature, every lie, every plan to turn my husband's legacy into a shopping mall. I pulled the folded trust documents from my purse, the real ones, the ones Harold had prepared years ago as our insurance policy against exactly this situation. This is the legal trust agreement, dated and notarized 5 years ago. It supersedes every document they forged, every title they claimed. The crowd pressed closer. I could see phone cameras recording, social media posts being typed with frantic thumbs. Harold stepped forward and took the microphone. His lawyer's voice carried an authority that made everyone listen. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've also filed a formal complaint with the district attorney's office. The charges include elder abuse, fraud, and conspiracy to commit theft. Law enforcement has been notified." As if summoned by his words, 2 sheriff's deputies emerged from the crowd. They approached Tyler with professional calm, one of them holding a folded paper. "Mr. Tyler Brennan? We have a warrant for your arrest." Tyler started to protest, but his voice was lost in the crowd's reaction. Madison stood frozen, watching her husband being handcuffed in front of half the county. Betty Sue took the microphone back. "I've known Martha Hartwell for 30 years, she announced to the crowd. "I've watched her work herself to the bone building something beautiful, only to be betrayed by the very people she loved most. What we witnessed here today wasn't family business, it was theft, pure and simple." The crowd began to disperse around Madison's booth. Vendors started packing up nearby tables. Festival organizers made phone calls. Tyler was led away to a patrol car while Madison stood alone beside baskets of peaches she no longer had any right to sell. I didn't look at her as I walked away. I'd said what needed to be said, done what needed to be done. Now the law would take its course, and I would go home, to my real home, the one James and I built with love instead of lies. But as I reached my truck, I heard footsteps behind me. Madison's voice, smaller than I'd ever heard it, "Grandmama, wait." I turned around. The festival noise continued in the background, but it felt distant, like we were standing in a bubble of silence. "I'm sorry," she whispered, and for a moment she looked like the little girl who used to help me make peach preserves, who would fall asleep on my lap during evening thunderstorms. "Are you sorry you did it, or sorry you got caught?" I asked. She didn't answer, which was answer enough. "Madison," I said, using the gentle voice I'd once used to teach her right from wrong, "being sorry doesn't unring a bell. It doesn't give back what you took. And it sure doesn't erase the look in your eyes when you told me I was nothing but a guest in my own home." I got in my truck and drove home, to the orchard, to the house, to the land that would never again be stolen from under my feet. 2 weeks after the festival, I sat on my front porch watching the sunrise paint the peach trees gold and orange, sipping coffee from James's favorite mug. The orchard was quiet except for the sound of sprinklers and the occasional truck heading to the farmer's market with the day's harvest. It was the kind of peace I'd forgotten existed, the peace that comes from being exactly where you belong. The legal proceedings had moved swiftly. Tyler was facing multiple felony charges and had been released on bond while awaiting trial. Madison wasn't charged criminally, but Harold had made it clear that any attempt to contest the trust would result in further legal action. They'd both signed documents renouncing any claim to the orchard or the lake house, though I suspected that had more to do with avoiding additional charges than any genuine remorse. I hadn't seen either of them since the festival. According to Betty Sue's network of church ladies, the most efficient intelligence system in North Georgia, they'd packed up and moved to Tyler's cousin's place outside Atlanta. Good riddance, I thought, though the satisfaction was tempered by a sadness I hadn't expected. The hardest part wasn't losing Madison and Tyler. It was losing the version of Madison I thought I'd raised, the granddaughter who'd existed more in my hopes than in reality. But life has a way of filling empty spaces with unexpected gifts. The first surprise came in the form of Marcus Jefferson, Madison's ex-boyfriend from high school. He'd heard about what happened through the local grapevine and stopped by to offer his help with the late harvest. Marcus had studied agriculture at the University of Georgia and had been working for a sustainable farming cooperative in North Carolina. "Mrs. Hartwell," he said, standing hat in hand on my front steps like his grandmother had taught him, "I know you probably have plenty of help, but if you need an extra pair of hands for harvest season, I'm between jobs right now." Marcus had always been a good boy, polite, hardworking, the kind of young man who opened doors for ladies and said, "Yes, ma'am," without being asked. I'd always wondered why Madison had broken up with him senior year, but now I understood. Marcus had substance, and substance can't be manipulated the way Tyler could. "I can pay fair wages," I told him. "I'm not looking for wages," he said. "I'm looking to learn. My grandmother always said you knew more about growing peaches than anyone in Georgia. If you're willing to teach, I'm willing to work." That's how I gained not just a farmhand, but something I hadn't expected, a protege. Marcus threw himself into the work with an enthusiasm that reminded me of James in his younger days. He asked thoughtful questions about soil composition and irrigation timing. He took notes in a weathered composition book and studied agricultural journals in the evenings. Most importantly, he understood that farming wasn't just about profit margins, it was about stewardship. The second surprise came from Sarah Beth Murphy, Madison's childhood friend who'd grown up on the neighboring dairy farm. Sarah Beth was 26, recently divorced, and struggling to make ends meet as a single mother of 2 young girls. She'd always been the steady one in their friendship, the voice of reason that Madison had stopped listening to years ago. "Mrs. Hartwell," she said when she appeared at my kitchen door one humid afternoon, "I heard you might need help with the preserving operation this season." For 40 years, I'd made Hartwell's famous peach preserves, selling them at farmers markets and specialty stores throughout the Southeast. It had started as a way to use fruit that was too ripe for shipping, but had grown into a profitable sideline that helped sustain the orchard through lean years. "I can't pay much," I warned her. "I don't need much," she replied. "Just enough to keep me and my girls afloat while I figure out what comes next. And maybe." She hesitated, then continued with quiet determination. "Maybe you could teach me the business side? I've got ideas for expanding into jellies and fruit butters, maybe even getting into some of the specialty stores in Atlanta." Sarah Beth had something Madison never did, genuine respect for what came before, combined with vision for what could be. Within a week, she'd reorganized my entire preserving operation, streamlined the labeling process, and created a social media presence that brought in more orders than I'd seen in years. Her daughters, 6-year-old Emma and 8-year-old Grace, became regular fixtures around the orchard. They were polite children with dirt-stained knees and endless curiosity, reminding me of the grandchildren I'd thought I'd have with Madison. They helped gather windfall peaches for the preserves, learned to identify ripe fruit by color and feel, and spent hot afternoons on my front porch with glasses of sweet tea and picture books. The third surprise was the hardest to accept: forgiveness, not for Madison, but for myself. I'd spent weeks replaying every moment of Madison's childhood, looking for signs I'd missed, mistakes I'd made. Had I spoiled her too much? Been too indulgent? Failed to teach her the value of hard work and honest dealing? It was Marcus who helped me see the truth, though he did it without preaching or judgment. We were working in the North Grove one evening, checking the irrigation lines before the next day's heat, when he said something that stopped me in my tracks. "You know, Mrs. Hartwell, my grandmother always told me you can plant the same seeds in the same soil and still get different fruit. Some trees grow strong and bear sweet fruit for decades. Others look healthy but produce nothing but bitter disappointment. It's not the soil's fault when a tree doesn't grow right." I looked at this young man, barely out of college, offering wisdom that my 80 years hadn't taught me. "Your grandmother sounds like a smart woman." "She was," he said quietly. "She also said that the best farmers don't waste time mourning the trees that don't produce. They focus on nurturing the ones that do." That night, I sat in James's office, my office now, and wrote a letter I never intended to send. I wrote to Madison, telling her about Marcus and Sarah Beth, about the girls who called me Grandma Martha and helped me make preserves. I wrote about forgiveness and disappointment, about the difference between loving someone and enabling them. I folded the letter and put it in my desk drawer, next to James's old reading glasses and the deed to our land. Writing it had been enough. Some conversations are meant to be held with yourself. By September, the rhythm of the orchard had settled into something new but familiar. Marcus proved to be a natural leader, coordinating the harvest crew with efficiency and kindness. Sarah Beth's preserves were flying off the shelves, and she'd already started negotiations with a boutique grocery chain in Atlanta. The girls had started school but spent their afternoons at the orchard, doing homework at my kitchen table and helping with small tasks around the operation. They were learning the same lessons I'd tried to teach Madison 40 years earlier: that worthwhile things take time to grow, that honest work has its own rewards, that taking care of the land means it will take care of you. One evening in late September, I stood on my front porch watching Grace and Emma chase fireflies between the peach trees while their mother finished cleaning the preserving kitchen. Marcus was checking the locks on the equipment shed, making sure everything was secure for the night. This wasn't the family I'd planned to have, but it was the family I'd been given. And maybe, I thought as I watched the fireflies dance like tiny lanterns in the gathering dusk, sometimes the gifts we don't expect are the ones we need most. James would have liked Marcus's steady determination and Sarah Beth's entrepreneurial spirit. He would have delighted in the girls' laughter echoing through the orchard he'd planted with such hope. As the stars appeared above the Georgia mountains, I realized that Madison and Tyler had tried to steal my past, but they'd inadvertently given me something precious, a future I'd never dared to imagine. Spring came early to the Georgia mountains that year, with dogwood blossoms appearing in March and the peach trees budding before the last frost warning had passed. I stood in my kitchen at dawn, making coffee and watching Marcus walk the rows, checking for freeze damage from the unexpected cold snap we'd had 2 nights before. It had been 8 months since the festival, 8 months since I'd reclaimed what was mine and discovered what I didn't know I was looking for. The orchard was thriving under Marcus's careful management. Sarah Beth's preserving business had expanded to include 3 specialty store chains, and her daughters had become the grandchildren I'd never expected to have. The letter from Madison arrived on a Tuesday, slipped under my door sometime before sunrise. No postmark, no return address, just my name written in the careful cursive I'd taught her when she was 8 years old. I let it sit on my kitchen table while I made breakfast, fed the barn cats, and checked on the seedlings Sarah Beth and I were starting for this year's vegetable garden. Some letters demand immediate attention, others can wait until you're ready to receive what they have to say. When I finally opened it, I found 3 pages of careful handwriting, not the hasty scrawl Madison usually used, but the deliberate script of someone choosing each word with care. She wrote about the last 8 months, about living in Tyler's cousin's cramped apartment in Atlanta, about the divorce proceedings that had left her with nothing but debt and a tarnished reputation. Tyler had blamed her for everything, claiming she'd manipulated him into the scheme, and their marriage had crumbled under the weight of legal fees and mutual recrimination. She wrote about getting a job at a garden center outside the city, starting at minimum wage and working her way up to assistant manager. She wrote about learning to live on her own for the first time in her adult life, about budgeting groceries and taking the bus to work and falling asleep each night in a studio apartment that smelled like other people's cooking. But mostly, she wrote about understanding. "I know now what I took from you," she wrote in her careful script. "It wasn't just the land or the house or the business. It was your faith in me. It was your belief that the little girl who helped you make preserves and fell asleep on your lap during thunderstorms would grow up to be someone worthy of your love and trust. I stole that faith and broke it, and I know I can never give it back." She wrote about seeing the newspaper article featuring Sarah Beth's preserving business, about learning through mutual friends that Marcus was managing the orchard with skill and integrity. She wrote about understanding, finally, the difference between inheriting something and earning it. The letter ended with a request I hadn't expected: "I don't want the orchard back. I don't deserve it, and honestly, I'm not sure I ever did. But I would like permission to visit Granddaddy's grave. I have things I need to say to him, apologies I should have made while he was alive to hear them." I folded the letter and put it in the same drawer where I kept the one I'd written to her but never sent. Then I walked out to the family cemetery, a small plot on the hill overlooking the orchard where James rested under a simple granite headstone surrounded by the wild roses he'd loved. I sat on the wooden bench I'd placed there after his funeral and looked out over the land we'd built together. The peach trees were covered in pink blossoms, promising another good harvest. Marcus was in the South Grove with 2 of the seasonal workers, repairing fence posts damaged by the recent storms. Sarah Beth's daughters were in school, but their laughter still seemed to echo between the trees. What would James have wanted me to do? He'd always believed in second chances, in the power of genuine remorse to change a person's heart. He'd also been a practical man who understood that trust, once broken, was the hardest thing in the world to repair. That evening, I called the number Madison had included in her letter. She answered on the second ring, her voice tentative and smaller than I remembered. "Hello, Madison," I said. "I got your letter." The silence stretched between us, filled with 8 months of separation and 40 years of complicated history. "You can visit the cemetery," I told her. "Sunday mornings are best. I'm usually at church then." "Thank you," she whispered, and I could hear tears in her voice. "Madison," I said before she could hang up, "this doesn't fix everything. It doesn't erase what happened or give you back what you gave away. But your granddaddy always said everyone deserves the chance to make peace with their mistakes." "I understand," she said. "And Grandmama? I'm glad about Marcus and Sarah Beth. I'm glad you found people who deserve what I couldn't appreciate." After I hung up, I walked out to the front porch and sat in my rocking chair, watching the stars appear above the mountain ridges. The evening air was soft and warm, carrying the scent of peach blossoms and honeysuckle. This wasn't forgiveness, exactly. It was something more complex, an acknowledgement that love and disappointment can coexist, that family ties can be severed but never completely erased, that some wounds heal into scars that remain tender but no longer actively bleed. 2 weeks later, Sarah Beth found me in the preserving kitchen, stirring a batch of peach butter and humming an old hymn James used to love. "Mrs. Hartwell," she said, "Grace wants to know if she can enter some of our preserves in the 4-H competition this summer." I smiled, thinking of Madison at that age, eager to show off what she'd learned, proud to be part of something bigger than herself. "Of course she can. We'll start her with the classic peach preserves, teach her the whole process from tree to jar. And Emma wants to learn about grafting techniques," Sarah Beth continued. "She's been reading that agricultural manual you gave her, asking all kinds of questions about rootstock and compatibility." "These girls," I realized, we're getting the education Madison had rejected, not just about farming, but about patience, persistence, and the satisfaction that comes from nurturing something from seed to harvest. That Sunday, I drove past the cemetery on my way home from church and saw a lone figure kneeling beside James's headstone. Madison's car was parked under the oak tree, and she was placing fresh flowers, peach blossoms and wild roses, on the grave. I didn't stop. Some conversations are meant to be private, some apologies need to be made without an audience. But I said a small prayer for both of them, for James, who'd always seen the best in people even when they disappointed him, and for Madison, who was finally learning to see the cost of her choices. Later that afternoon, Marcus found me in the vegetable garden, planting tomato seedlings with Emma and Grace. The girls had dirt under their fingernails and streaks of mud on their cheeks, completely absorbed in the work of placing each plant at the proper depth and distance. "Mrs. Hartwell," Marcus said, "I've been thinking about the North Grove. The trees there are getting old, probably need to be replaced in the next few years. I was wondering if you'd consider letting me experiment with some of the new disease-resistant varieties, maybe try some organic growing methods." This was what James had always dreamed of, someone who would look beyond the next harvest, who would think about the orchard's future in decades rather than seasons. "Draw up a plan," I told him. "We'll start with a test plot this fall, see how they take to our soil." Emma looked up from her tomato planting, soil-stained hands on her hips. "Can we plant some cherry trees too? Mama says you used to grow the best cherries in the county." I knelt down beside her, helping her firm the soil around a particularly stubborn seedling. "Your mama's right. We stopped growing cherries because they're finicky and the market wasn't good. But maybe it's time to try again." As the sun set behind the mountain ridges, painting the sky in shades of peach and gold, I looked around at this unexpected family I'd gained, Marcus with his quiet competence and genuine love for the land, Sarah Beth with her entrepreneurial spirit and fierce protectiveness of her daughters, Emma and Grace with their endless curiosity and willingness to work. This wasn't the legacy I'd planned to leave, but it was the one that had grown from the soil of loss and betrayal, watered with tears and tended with the kind of love that asks nothing in return except the chance to nurture something beautiful. Madison had tried to steal my past, but she'd unknowingly given me the greatest gift of all, the knowledge that what we build with love is stronger than what others try to tear down with greed. The orchard would outlive us all, but the lessons learned in its shade, about patience, persistence, and the power of choosing hope over bitterness, those would echo through generations. As we walked back to the house in the gathering dusk, Grace slipped her small hand into mine and asked, "Grandma Martha, will you teach us how to make peach ice cream tomorrow?" "Of course, sweet girl," I said, squeezing her hand gently. "That's what grandmamas are for." And for the first time in 8 months, I truly meant it. If this story touched your heart, don't let it end here. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful first-person grandma revenge and resilience stories.